All right, Mayor Mamdani went to Washington. Mr. Mamdani went to Washington, and instead of fireworks, we saw a big, cozy love fest between President Trump and the mayor-elect. The president even said, "Sure, it's okay. You can call me a fascist. Make it easier." Let's talk about it. MS Now political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is with me. Tim, we were watching it live as it came in, and I think there were a couple times where, I don't know if my jaw dropped, but I found a few moments pretty surprising. What about you?
It felt very strange, and it did kind of feel like Zoran was like from a foreign country or
Why
something.
was he standing there? Why were they not sitting?
Yeah, it kind of felt like this in a sense, like the tone where it's sort of like when Canada has to come, when Mark Carney has to come down, and you know he doesn't like Trump, but he's getting tariffed, and so he's going to have to do the fake thing. Like it felt like that, like a foreign dignitary trying to just make Trump not go crazy and send in the troops, and the fascist joke kind of bugged me. I'm not wearing my pearls today. I'm not a clutch your pearls person about Trump, about jokes. Like politicians joking is good, like that's fine. There's something with the American president in the Oval Office making a joke that's like, sure, call me a fascist. It kind of makes the whole system seem like a joke.
Is that the one thing you're pointing to?
Kind of. It bugged me a little bit.
Really?
The whole thing was weird.
Not like, telling a reporter that she's insubordinate for asking a foreign leader about a bone saw murder.
Oh, no, that was bad, too. But that wasn't really a joke, I don't think. It's reality TV show Trump is what this was, right? And I think that's why it was kind of so unsettling and weird. It felt like they were playing president, right? He's like, go ahead and call me a fascist. Why does he like Zoran? Just because Zoran has juice, and Trump like sees him. It's like
game recognizes.
Yeah,
game.
It's like an up and coming person in the showbiz space, and he's thinking, I'm gonna have you come open for me. We're gonna do a set down at and it just kind of minimizes what it is that we're doing here.
I thought it was interesting that Mamdani also he clearly knew what he was going to say to flatter Trump, and how he was going to answer questions that I think they could pretty easily predict. From the assembled group of people who were questioning him. I hesitate to say reporters for a lot of those folks.
Yeah, Pizzagate Jack Posobiec. We saw that when I saw his face. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, literally, one of the guys pushing the Pizzagate conspiracy theory is doing the putting on a suit and being like, I'm going to ask a serious question of you, Mr. Mayor. It's a bizarre, again, it just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like,
it doesn't feel serious.
It doesn't feel serious.
It doesn't feel serious. And when Mamdani looks at him and says, "Well, 1 in 10 of my voters voted for you," it's clearly intended to flatter the president. And he was asked, "Well, what tips did you get from watching the president and his successful political career?" And Mamdani had an answer for that.
Yeah, that would I think bug me if it was a national Democrat that was in there doing that. Because I feel like they'd have an obligation to like not puff up Trump and flatter him in any way, but he's the mayor of New York. He's not. He can't run for president. He wasn't born.
He's not a direct threat.
Yeah. So he's not. So it's not. So I don't know. I think that he's trying. What Mamdani's trying to do is he wants to be a good mayor of New York. But to me, I'm an outsider to this as a former Republican, but I think he carries like a weight of being the face of the left, whether you call that DSA or the left wing of the party, and being like, I need to do a good job.
Or we're done. We're cooked, yeah.
Right, so that other people who agree with me ideologically you can get in and do well.
That was always the risk with his candidacy. He was making very big promises. And what I would wonder is, if you can't deliver on these promises, what are you doing to the movement?
Right. And so I think that's kind of why, for him, he has this obligation. Like, his obligation is different than if you're a national Democrat. It's like, I don't want this guy to, because Trump could, I think, materially harm New York.
But so here's the question. Right? Does Donald Trump want to materially harm New York? Because he's got a lot of business investments in New York. He's got Trump Tower, but there are other things as well. Jared Kushner has got business investments in New York. And then all of his friends have business investments in New York. The buddies, the billionaire buddies.
That line about how he wouldn't leave was interesting. That was actually, I think, the most substantively interesting. Because a lot of it was just this puffery of, we both agree that costs should be lower. And they kept repeating their points. That was like a specific thing that was one good question from that clown show of
Let's play that line. Let's play it.
Would you feel comfortable living in New York City under a Mamdani administration?
Yeah, I would. I really would. Especially after the meeting. Absolutely.
What makes you comfortable?
We agree on a lot more than I would have thought.
So yeah, he says, yes, I would feel comfortable staying in New York City. This is after a number of billionaires said, I'm leaving if Mamdani wins. I'm going to get out of here. They're going to lose the tax base without us.
And you hear this a lot from Jewish New Yorkers. Like, I've been, even people in the center right? That are scared of Mamdani for various reasons about his policies or things that he said in the past. Like I hear this on the Board podcast. Like when I'm talking about Zoran, like his policies aren't exactly my cup of tea per se. But I've been impressed with him over the last 3 months, and I think that he's shown a practicality. Like, I've watched this campaign pretty closely. I think he's shown a practicality that I think is noteworthy, and I think that he wants to do a good job. And the fights he's chosen to pick, like Jessica keeping Tish on, and at the police, it encourages me when I see like the Maoist wing of the DSA putting out statements about how Zoran's disappointing them. So anyway, he's shown a practicality, and when I say that, I will hear from like centrist Democrats or never Trumper types who are like, Tim, no, like it's very scary, like I'm very deeply worried about him. So for Trump to give him that imprimatur when a lot of his buddies are like, I might need to leave town, that's pretty noteworthy.
How does MAGA react to that display?
I think that a lot of them say that's just Trump being Trump, right?
Don't they want him to go after him? Don't they want him? I mean, you could tell from the way the reporters
in the room,
the people in the room from the various outlets, like the Jack Posobiec, the Pizzagate folks, how they were questioning Mamdani. They were trying to get Trump to call him a communist. They were trying to get him to admit that he thinks Trump is a fascist. They were trying to feed what the narrative is on the MAGA right.
This is the thing that Trump's always had going for him, is that he has, I think he does get the leash to do that with MAGA voters, right? Like if it was somebody else, if it was Ron DeSantis, we saw this during the campaign, right? Or like some other Republican leader, and they did that exact same thing with Mamdani, like the right-wing media would be going insane. Trump has gained enough credibility with his own voters, at least on maybe not on some of these other things we can talk about, but at least on this topic of like, will he go after the left hard enough? He's checked the box on going after the left hard enough.
Don't you think that we are only days, maybe hours, or maybe it's a week before Trump just starts going after him again? Say he wants to do immigration enforcement, then all of that goodwill is yesterday, and the reality show takes a turn. They were best friends, and now they hate each other.
Correct. And ICE is the spot there for sure.
Yeah.
Because Zoran has been speaking out about Homan and the ICE stuff already, and there was the video of him during the campaign, he was like yelling at them.
Yeah, he was trying to block the enforcement.
And so all it takes for this little buddy comedy. I don't know. I was gonna say bromance. It doesn't feel like a bromance. Zoran looked pretty stiff. But whatever it is, this little buddy reality show thing to fall apart is, I think, one really bad ICE or CPB raid in New York, right? Where Zoran has to come to the defense.
About that, and he said that, and they both had an answer for it. Like they coordinated an answer in that room. They're really focused on crime, and they skated over what is immigration enforcement really going to look like in New York City?
Right, they did. Because as they talked about their areas of common ground, which basically boils down to we think prices should be lower. I don't know if their area of common ground is actually any substantive policies. Building housing, maybe.
What I also thought was interesting was that Donald Trump, in terms of Donald Trump, lied a little bit less, I guess, in that display than he normally does. His the rant that he normally gives about how great he is and all the wars he's ended and the affordability and all it was shorter. It was much more contained than it normally is. And because I was wondering, is Zoran Mamdani, like Zelensky had to do, going to have to sit there and just kind of stay silent, or what does he do if Donald Trump just starts lying and lying and lying and lying and lying? And he didn't put him in that position.
He didn't, and he didn't put him in on the ICE. The one area would have been the ICE and the troops and CBP, right? Because if Trump was up there saying like, no, crime's too bad, we're sending people in, I think that would have made Zoran. I would assume
something would have happened.
You would assume. I don't know.
We'll see. All right. I'm curious about MAGA reaction because, and you talk about how Trump has more goodwill than any other politician. Is that goodwill starting to break? Because it's been, just to go broader and to leave Mamdani, I would argue it's been a pretty bad week for President Trump. Do you think maybe the worst week of the presidency so far?
I think definitely it's been the worst 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. Like was this week? The worst stretch. Yeah, certainly. If you go back to the elections in New York with Mamdani, and then Virginia, New Jersey, like basically starting there.
That was November 4th.
Through the kind of shutdown fight, which I was the rare person to say Trump lost, and I think I've been vindicated on that one. I think the shutdown fight was bad for Trump because it raised the salience of something that he doesn't have really great answers for, which is the rising cost of healthcare in particular, and then Epstein, obviously. and and then the loss with Epstein. And I guess that's why this week would be the week if you had to pinpoint 1 week, because it was just the one time that he got beaten within an intra-party political fight, intra-party. Like, it was not some Republicans
Marjorie
stood up to
Taylor
him
Greene
and won.
proved more powerful
Yes.
than Donald Trump this week.
That has not had. I was trying to think. The last time that his own party bucked him like that.
You're going
I
to say
think,
John McCain.
Was McCain, right?
Yeah.
But that was
that
like
was-
this last gasp
Yeah.
of somebody who had
And it was
already
just
lost.
McCain. It wasn't
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right.
It was her, and it was Thomas Massey, and it was Lauren Boebert.
Right. I think
and then
Susan
it was
Collins might have been in.
then it was the entire Republican Party.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it would have just been 100 of them if Donald Trump didn't try to lead the parade, but it was going to be a what they call a jailbreak moment.
Yeah, but the McCain thing was in the first year, wasn't it, or the second year, maybe
It was
early
like
in the second year?
2017.
Yeah. And so that's been a long time, and like I said, that was almost like McCain sticking his thumb in his eye after he'd already lost, kind of. And
Yeah.
so this is materially different from that. Like, this is people within the MAGA wing of the party taking him on directly and making him fold.
Is Marjorie Taylor Greene looking to the future?
I think so.
Trump to MAGA post-Trump.
I think so. I think that, it's hard to get your head around exactly what is in Marjorie Taylor Greene's head. I mean, she's got some crazy stuff bouncing around in there. But I think there are a couple of factors. One, I think that she was genuinely, and if you talk to Robert Draper at the Times, does really good reporting on her and has
Yeah.
followed her for a long time. And he said that I think she was genuinely upset that she did not get more support for the Senate or governor races there in Georgia, and felt a little bit jilted over that. That there was no faith in her coming from Trump in the White House. So I think that's part of it. I think that maybe the 2028 stuff she's a little bit, titillated by or interested in. I don't know. Like, why not think about that?
That she could run for president? Who's saying that?
They're MAGA podcasters talking about it.
Really?
Yeah, she went on a podcast and was asked about it recently on Tim Dillon's podcast. So I think
I
that's a
shouldn't
little
do
bit
that
of
because I think everybody said that about Donald Trump.
Yeah,
Look what
exactly.
happened.
Myself included at the top of the list. And so there's a little bit of that. But I think that there's something about Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's an element of this that's genuine, I think. Because unlike a lot of these other people who are fake MAGA, who came around to Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene was a Facebook commenter who was like Maha, started a CrossFit gym. She was excited about it all. Like, she was on board with all of it. And so because of that, she looks at Trump and sees all of the gilded stuff, the Great Gatsby stuff, hearing about people in her district complaining about healthcare costs. And she's like, wait a minute. I think she genuinely feels like he is betraying some parts of the core.
He's just out of touch completely.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the Gatsby party, as the shutdown was going on and people weren't getting their paychecks and people were lining up at food banks, that seemed. Who thought that was a good idea?
And the tech guys.
Have they read the book?
No. They've not read the book. You might have watched one of the movies. The tech guys, I think, is even a worse political judgment. Trump is motivated at.
Apparently, we can hear sirens in this
All right.
studio.
Oh, I don't know. And that's now. Trump. Trump has always been motivated. Like, he's the outer borough guy that wants to be respected, right? There's an element of this.
There's always been
so
a chip
he
on his
wants
shoulder.
the rich guys, like these richest people in the world, these tech guys, to love him and respect him and suck up to him.
And tell him he's smart.
Tell him he's smart and do all that. He wants
Yeah.
that. And that is actually more important to him than the thing that
America telling him he's smart.
Right. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think genuinely Marjorie Taylor Greene does not care about Mark Zuckerberg. And if Mark Zuckerberg came to her house and brought her a trophy, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene would say, get the hell out of my
And do
house.
you think Trump genuinely doesn't care about Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yeah, right. And so I think that in that way, though, this is where Trump is wrong. I think that the base is on Marjorie Taylor Greene's side on that question. This idea that he is going to sidle up to these tech oligarchs and have them over for fancy parties at the White House. I think that people liked it better when Trump was trash talking those guys.
Yeah. Aren't they looking at the polling? Do they care, I guess? I mean, do they think he's not running for 2028 and they're just he's just enriching himself and who cares about what's going to happen next? I mean, he's not on the ballot in 2028. He's not a part of it. So I can understand why he doesn't care about that. But the polling, if the Democrats win, he's going to be, there's going to be a lot of investigations. There's going to be a lot of congressional subpoenas. It's going to be a headache for him in the way the first term was.
Yeah. I think that's a great question about what's going on in his head. I don't know that. I mean, there obviously is a gold rush happening around him with the corruption, but that's his family more than him. I mean, he's pretty old. He's got plenty of money. I think Don Jr. and Jared and Eric, all these guys are very excited for all this. And I think Trump likes to have his name on the list and wants the fancy plane and stuff. But I don't know. Is that what's motivating him? He should care about the poll numbers, even if he's not running in 2028, because you see what happens when his poll numbers drop. He's losing power, right?
He's definitely losing power. He's
People
at
are not scared of him.
39%, I think, on Gallup. There was another poll out that showed him at 35% approval, and he's down on all of his signature issues. He's down on the economy. He's down on immigration. He's down on people thinking that he cares about them. He's down.
Yeah, he is, and you can see what the impacts are of that. People are less scared of him. Like the Republicans in Congress are less scared of him. I think in the outer world,
Are they really less? I mean, we saw it with
a little bit,
Marjorie
yeah.
Taylor Greene thing, or the Epstein discharge petition. We saw it with the we're not going to get rid of the filibuster,
Yeah.
which I think is it's a
Wasn't
small
nothing.
thing. It's
Yeah.
not nothing. But are we going to see it on? Are we going to see it on tariffs? Are we going to see the Congress come in and say we're gonna take our tariff authority back?
no, I'm not expecting a full jailbreak, but it is.
But
it is
the
it's
country does
meaningfully
not
different.
like the tariffs.
That's true.
So, I mean, I guess the tension here, do they get reelected based on just supporting Donald Trump and being in the Republican Party, or do they get elected on acknowledging what the country is saying, which is we don't like these tariffs and we think things are too expensive?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be some of them that make that calculation. You would think. You get into next year if you look at these numbers. Here's one piece of evidence of that, right? Is this redistricting fight, right? I think a big motivating factor of what you saw in Ohio, Kansas, Indiana, I think there might be a Mike Pence element to this, where he's working behind the scenes. Just
You think
to get,
so?
Yeah, I do think he's getting a little bit
Mike
of
Pence
vengeance.
was on MS Now with Vaughn the other day.
Was he?
Yeah, he came on with Vaughn at the Cheney funeral.
Mike Pence rejected my invite to come on the Blog podcast. You're always welcome, Mike. I would love to see you. I have a couple of tough questions, but we'll have fun. It'll be
Yeah,
nice.
I'm sure.
So where was I going with that? Oh yeah, that's redistricting.
That Mike Pence might be whispering to
Yeah.
people behind the scenes.
Yeah, that was my tangent.
Okay,
The point I was
okay.
trying to make was that in these states, the reason why they didn't redistrict some of them is because some of the incumbents are getting worried. Right, and so this is what I'm talking about. If like
That
his
it's not
numbers
such
are
a
going
safe
down,
district for them?
Yeah. They're like, okay, it's one thing if I won by 15 last time, and you want a redistricting to move some of the Republicans out of my district to create a new Republican district over here. Whatever, that sounds fine. All of a sudden, it's like, ooh, I won by 15 last time. Trump's numbers if Trump is at 35, all of a sudden I might have to work this time for re-election. I'm gonna have to raise money. Maybe I'll lose. If at least it's just gonna be a pain. Never mind. I don't want to redistrict. Not worth it to do this for Trump. So that was another area where he's been bucked in multiple states, solely because I think of his declining political standing and maybe Mike Pence troublemaking.
There's also just a lot of talk online in some of the more influential podcasts or comedians about him losing his step or him being distasteful the way that he's talking about reporters, calling that reporter piggy. That's not going over well.
Some of the bro podcasts thought that was funny. I'm sorry to report.
But some of them didn't. And some of them were just saying, what is the president doing?
right.
How horrible that woman must have felt. Some of the bro podcasts were actually saying that. Shane Gillis, I think, was one of them. And then he's trying to say that, or he thinks, maybe he's joking, but even the joke, I think, is meaningful, that the president doesn't seem all there.
Yeah, I think he said he's going towards Biden territory,
Yeah.
which is just important to say that it shows like it's not coming from someone on the left saying that. Yeah, I hate this game kind of.
You don't think it matters?
Well, it does matter.
I don't think
but
Joe Rogan talking to Theo Vaughn
no.
and saying like the DHS taking my
that
image
really
is crazy.
matters. That really matters.
Okay.
Actually, I just meant like the question of is Donald Trump losing it. It's kind of like I don't know. He's been crazy, Trump, to me. Sure, he looks a little different.
Sometimes it looks like he's falling asleep in the Oval Office.
He's old. He's old, no doubt. But I guess this is. Do I have to hand it to Donald Trump on your YouTube show here? He's like out there. He's talking. I would say what on a given day. 6 hours. I mean, he's talking all the time. He's talking to people all the time. That's tiring. I talk a lot. I get tired. I'm a young man. Joe Biden was talking like twice a week. like we wouldn't you'd go days. Like there'd be a lid. So I'm just saying. But no, the bro guy is starting to again. This is what I'm talking about. If he felt stronger politically, Joe Rogan would feel just more like, not like, oh, I'm going to do propaganda for Trump, but like, why do this? Like, why pick a fight with him over this? I'll go talk with somebody about whether the pyramids are real or whatever. Like, I'm going to go do that instead. Like, the declining popularity leads to all these other parts of the coalition feeling free to kind of say what they think.
Do you think we're in a revolutionary moment where everything's changing? Political parties, alignments. Do you think the Democratic Party looks like the Democratic Party in 5-10 years?
I have no idea. What do you think?
You don't want to be. I think we are. I think we're in a moment of real change, and I think that I was listening to a compelling argument that Fareed Zakaria was making about how we want to say that this is really an economic moment and it's populism, and people feel that the political divide and the reason why there's a right and the left is economics right now, and the Democrats are all representing the rich people, and the Republicans have the working class. And his argument is, no, it's really cultural. That the political alignment is much more about cultural issues, and people are actually voting against their economic interests and for their cultural preferences or their cultural comfort.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that is the case, and I think that there's a decent argument to be made on that, because he talks about how it's happening globally. There's a lot of right-wing populism happening all over Europe. France is a socialist place, and they've got a pretty strong right-wing party. Germany, like protected manufacturing, they've got a very strong right-wing populist party.
India,
So there's a bubbling up of all of this, and his argument, and not to simplify it too much, is that it's cultural.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, and if that's what's happening here, I wonder how the Democrats end up trying to meet that. There's an example that I always bring up that one of my producers rolls their eyes at because they think it's a tiresome example, but I think it's really illustrative. It's the example of Denmark. And Denmark is a very socialist place. Progressive dream, all the policies you'd want, big pensions, broad tax space. Everyone lives life, they feel great. But what they've done, and the reason that they've been able to beat back a populist right-wing rise, and they're seeing even next door in Sweden, is that they are a very hard line on immigration. Yeah. Like extremely hard line on immigration. They allow immigration, but if you come over the border illegally, you're sent right back. And then they have also a bunch of internal policies about assimilation. So they've been able to maintain their foothold there because what would be the Democratic Party just took a really strong, hard position on immigration.
Yeah. So I guess I have three thoughts on that now that you've given me time to think about whether we're at a revolutionary moment or not. Or not three thoughts, there are like three elements, I think. And the Republican Party, to Fareed's point, I think is going to look like a right-wing populist party like all over the globe. In some ways, I think that the Republican Party of like the post-World War era was the outlier. It was like a 50-year outlier because everywhere else in the world, the right-wing party is a blood and soil nationalist populist party, right? And it's like, why wouldn't ours be like that?
So the UK, would you say it was?
Well, no, not the Anglosphere, right? Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. But like Canada, UK, us, and Australia were like basically the outliers. And so I think that is probably where the Republicans are headed. As whether we're in a revolutionary moment or not, also the AI stuff really depends on it. Like, do we have a crash? Like, does the AI bubble crash, which creates economic pain? Or is it as good as the AI optimists think, and that totally disrupts everything?
How much should politicians embrace AI, or should they push AI back? Because, I mean, if you're embracing a technology that's going to put everybody out of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a huge space for a lefty populist to go after, to be anti-AI. Maybe not anti-AI, but for heavy AI regulation, right? And like and using kind of the bad elements as a I say boogeyman, not.
I guess you could try to position it for defense, but for everything else,
Or at health, there are other things like it could be really revolutionary in health. There could be good elements to it, but like actually taking those guys on, I think would be valuable. Here's the thing about the Democratic Party when I look at it, when you say is this a revolutionary moment. Everybody I see out there, with the exception of the guy we just were watching, is like pretty conventional. And which is the craziest thing to me, because I'm like, I think it's possible the Democrats could nominate somebody totally crazy in 2027. Like when Trump came on the scene, it's not going to be Trump, right? But he took positions. This is why one of the reasons, besides his clownishness, that we all thought he couldn't win, right? He was like, Bush is responsible for 9/11, and we shouldn't actually reform Social Security and Medicare, right? Like he took some hardline right-wing positions. He took like these heterodox positions. Everyone else in the primary is like within this narrow band of I'm a little more conservative or a little more moderate, and like he's like, no, on this one I'm more moderate, on this one I'm more conservative. there's no Democrats that are doing that right now, and, and that's surprising to me because I'm like, I think it could be potentially a moment where everything changes, but I'm not.
Gavin Newsom's kind of trying to do that by,
He's still a pretty conventional Democrat. Like his social media strategy is unconventional, and I think that's good and it's worked. And so for me, that would be like, I don't know, if I was either a rich left person, a lefty that was interested in running, or kind of a random Congress. If I was just Pete was the mayor of South Bend, and damn well almost won that primary last time. If I was just somebody on the left and who had kind of unconventional views on what is, maybe it's immigration like Denmark, or maybe it's AI, you name it. I think this is the time to try and say, like, I'm going to be totally different than the other Democrats, and I'm a liberal.
Come at
but
me,
yeah,
it's fine. I'm going to say what I think.
Yeah. I think this could definitely be a moment for that, but I don't see that. This would be the time where such a person would start to at least kind of be dipping their toe in the water.
There's no rumbling. I mean, I guess Mamdani, no, because he
wasn't born here.
He wasn't born here. Yeah. But there's no Mamdani-like figure. I mean, he's not even, but he's not.
The other one people throw out is Cuban. Yeah, and I had Cuban on, and that didn't sound like a guy that was running for president to me. And I asked him about it directly. He obviously gave the obvious answer that you would give, which is that his wife would kill him or whatever. But even still,
what do you think of Rahm?
I think that some of the things, some of Rahm's message is right. I think it's a tough messenger, being just. Like,
you don't think he's likable enough?
No, I like Rahm. Just being an establishment figure in the party for so long.
But you don't think he's able? I think he's interesting because he is somebody who's very willing to say what he thinks and to buck convention and to make enemies. And in the same way Donald Trump was, a big, brash character.
Yeah. He's not kind of as brash as you think, though. That was another thing when I was talking to Rahm recently. I don't know if you feel that way, but he doesn't even feel like Chris Christie. Like, it seems like his reputation is that way from like being behind the scenes, and he has a character. Like he could be a Sopranos character or something, but he doesn't. He's measured in his language,
he's also
though.
Persistently, he tries to be persistently charming, and is pretty successful at it.
Yeah, I like him. I don't know. I think it's tough for somebody who's been around since the 90s to do I'm going to really shake things up.
Does this next generation, I mean, do the 25-year-olds remember him or know who he is? And do they need to?
No, I don't think so.
Is it a benefit if they don't remember him?
For sure, probably. Yeah, I think the other thing, in a strange way, I think that the Gaza stuff is going to loom over the Democratic Party next time, too, and whoever that outsider candidate is would have to at least have a somewhat untraditional Democratic view on that, just because it's almost like it's a credibility marker with young people. Like, I don't think it's not going to be the thing everybody votes on, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like, it's a trust level, that you're willing to speak out strongly enough against.
Is it like going out against the invasion of Iraq? Like the way Trump did it.
Kind of, and I think so. And I don't have that strong views on that. I have kind of mixed views, honestly. I think it's a lot more complicated than the people who are very strident on both sides think. But just as an analytical matter. It's something I noticed with Zoran and some of these other primaries where you get a lot of credibility with people. And I think it would give, in the way that we were talking earlier about how Trump has credibility with the base and allows him to kind of do move around. Yeah. I feel like if you were strongly on the, anti-Bibi, I care deeply about Gaza, this is a genocide. Like if you had those views, I think it gives that politician more room within the Democratic Party to kind of maneuver in other places. It's just something I've observed. I don't know that Rahm obviously is not that.
All right, well, it was great to have you. If you were mayor, I would feel very comfortable living in your city.
Oh, would you? Thank you. I'd be taxing you. I would be taxing you. I don't know on what, but I'd find a way.
You'd find a way.
Yeah.
You'd find a way. Great. You'd tax me on my avocado toast.
Yeah. See you, Katie.
The bane of the millennial existence. Tim Miller, thank you so much.
Bye, girl.